Perfect. Okay, finally. So our technology is rebelling against us, so we have to fight it a little bit. And thank you for the invitation to give this brief presentation. I'll try to be as brief as possible and summarize the main ideas I presented in this paper last December with the same title, Rethinking Perception and Cognition in the Digital Environment. It's a more of a conceptual analysis that combines a psychophilosophical approach to understanding. I'll try to argue that for the first time in the human history, we are facing not only new technologies like artificial intelligence, as was previously historically overviewed by the professor, but also we are facing a new kind of environment that the humankind have never before seen. And I try to define several properties of it and then speculate on how it will affect our minds in future, right? So William James, the famous American psychologist, known as the father of American School of Psychology and Pragmatism, wrote two amazing books called Principles of Psychology, Book 1 and Book 2. And although he typically did not did any experiments like experimental psychologists do, he was more like an armchair psychologist. He actually was very right and very up-to-date and current on many, many things and concepts that we are talking today in terms of our minds, in terms of our psychology. So he was right to say in his Principles of Psychology that the minds inhabit environments which act on them and on which they in turn react, saying that the mind cannot be seen isolated from the environment in it which exists. So the mind reacts to the environment environment feeds back to the mind, and that's a sort of like a loop that our minds are engaged with. So environment, very important variable, right? Later, in the 60s, the famous Canadian media philosopher Marshall McLuhan wrote a book called Understanding Media, in which he proposed this idea that actually the media, or more in general, technologies, are actually extensions of our bodies and our senses, as he said in the book. But I would argue also digital technology is extension of our mind. For example, if pure technology, let's take the airplanes, right? Take us to places to which our legs, parts of our bodies, wouldn't take us in maybe many, many years, right? But now technology extends our body and enables us locomotion. For example, this microphone extends my voice, so many people can hear it. Otherwise, it will be difficult, etc. But we are now in the situation in which digital media, to which we are immersed, actually are extending our minds. Like, for example, a hammer would extend our hand, right? Also, digital media, extend our minds in various different ways. So this is the argument. So all forms live in an environment, exist in an environment they inhabit. And actually the word environment comes from the old French that says something that encircles something, right? So most of the theories basically are taking both sides of the coin, including the environment, right? So the first time we created the digital technology in the human history. Before that, if you think about it, we as humans evolved in environments that were highly analog, mechanical, environments in which things were physical, right, and not as esoteric as nowadays the digital technology thing. So our mind, historically and evolutionary, had to solve the problems of the physical environment. That's the first layer, and then the problem of social environment that is built on the top of the physical layer, being us, the social species that we are. But now we created the thing called digital technology that creates another different kind of layer of environment. So based on the top of those two, I would argue that there is a third type of environment that we've created in the 21st century. And all the other technologies that are mentioned, both from hardware side, like robotics, and from sort of like computational side, like artificial intelligence, they're all part of the same environment that we are designing and creating and constantly growing, inventing new things. So we designed many new types of objects, actually, if we can call them objects in the traditional sense, right? Things like e-text, electronic representation, website, cryptocurrency, non-fungible tokens, avatars, chatbots, video game characters, virtual realities, digital art, and many, many, many QR codes, for example, and many, many types of objects that were traditionally did not exist before within the context of our previous historical times. So when you create a new type of environment with new type of objects and new type of realities, naturally they will put a pressure, adaptational pressure on the mind to adapt to them. So this is the exercise in exploring how this potential technology would pressure our minds to adapt to the new reality, right? So nowadays we live in a world of things and bodies interconnected into internet. This is known as Internet of Things, right? Even your washing machine nowadays has like a Wi-Fi function, so it plays into. I think to each person there are 6 devices I've read somewhere that are sort of like interconnected to internet. But not only that, we are entering into the era from Internet of Things into the Internet of Bodies, in which people are already wearing hardware or have implants that are sort of like communicating through wire network and joining, for example, more global networks. So Elon Musk was previously mentioned, talks about Neuralink, right? That will be a sort of like an implant into the brain that will basically have a lot of capacities to communicate. So your body will itself become a thing on the internet, for example. So this is the idea of Internet of Bodies. Those type of technologies have the capacity to auto-organize, share data, right, communicate, react to situations and new environments, and so on. So I took some data from the Data Reportal, an organization that annually makes a report on the digital technologies based on many different countries and many different other organizations, just to summarize some interesting facts about the world that we are living in and why I think the digital environment becomes more and more prevalent. So we have around 8 billion people, and there are 5.6 unique billion of mobile phones, for example. There are 5.3 individuals who are using internet, and there are social media user identities, again, 5 billion. So more than a half of the human population is involved into the digital world one way or another. The digital technology is growing annually. This is in comparison to the previous year. You can see the numbers are growing, like social media, for example, 5.6% in response to 2003. This is January 2024, right? Internet use, when you ask people how they use internet, I think some of those facts here are very interesting. That on average, so this is an average number, we spend 6.4 hours for typical internet use. This is a worldwide average, which tells you something. If you think about in the context of how we are designed. I mean, a third of our life, basically, we are unconscious. We sleep, right? If we take 24 hours. And then we have, 16 hours while we are awake. Basically, 8 of those typically we work, in a sense. And 8 of those typically are related to our private life. But actually, we're probably spending most of our, or at least almost half of our wake life being online, being immersed in some form of a digital technology, which is, to me, very, very amazing. So this fact, just remember, 1/3 of our life basically is used in immersing of internet. What are the main reasons for using the internet, you might ask? Things like finding information, staying in touch with friends and family. And immediately this tells you that we are slowly moving our physical life, physical world, into the domain of the digital world. So now most of the news we get digitally. Most of the friends we are talking to digitally, right? We are networking digitally. All the things that we do online nowadays. So we are moving towards this kind of environment with a rapid speed and pace. And social media timeline, you can see that it's growing almost exponentially over the years. More and more people are getting into the network. And main reason, again, we define our social life within the digital environment and much less and less in the physical world, right? So I was thinking let's try to find some properties of the digital environment that will be defining for it, right? So, and I was thinking something like it is very dynamic, first of all, changing all the time. It is symbolic in nature. It is representational in nature. We have, I don't know, icons that are representative of real things. They're symbols, right? So we are interacting symbolically within this environment and naturally feels immaterial. Everything is in the cloud nowadays, right? So constantly changing, symbolic interaction, immaterial yet very immersive, we can say. A famous cognitive psychologist, James Gibson, who was proponent of ecological approach to psychology study. He was talking, the professor is familiar with this, he was talking about the concept of environmental affordances. And those are things, he says that the environment affords us doing things, those are opportunities. For example, when I see a chair, it is natural, it affords me to sit on it. Okay, so naturally I interact with the chair in a way that it affords me to do. But also these affordances are relational, right? Things that I can do with certain object, other people cannot do, right? So I think that this digital environment creates a complete new set of affordances that are placed upon us, and of course that will add adaptational pressure in order to adapt to those. So then it's hyper-connected, hyper-social, and very interestingly, spatio-temporally uniform. So hyper-connected and hyper-social means that through the digital media, we are meeting countless people online, countless. Something that we did not evolve to, although some research, like the famous Dunbar's number, says that more or less even online we are communicating in line with our evolutionary history for about on average 100 people, right? But those things are changing. And not only that, being present online in one way or another through forms of digital avatars, social networks, and having effect on various locations actually kind of changes the notion of space and time. It kind of becomes irrelevant when you put an information online in the digital domain. It's not stored in particular location, right? It is kind of everywhere. It is accessible everywhere and all the time. So suddenly the variable of space and time seems kind of very, very sort of relative in that kind of sense. So that would be another property of the digital environment. Then it is automated, multifunctional, and personalized. A lot of the things and algorithms and the machines and our phones are working in automatic fashion. And then there are multitasking devices that promote this kind of interaction with those particular tools. And very interestingly, those algorithms, for example, create a personalized microenvironments for each one of us. So, for example, my YouTube channel never looks the same with someone else's YouTube channel due to the nature of the algorithms working behind to tailor this environment to my personality, to my preferences, right? So think about this interesting phenomena in which each individual has its own personalized environment in one sense. So that's a property of the digital world most of the time in the physical world and the social world, we share the environment, although we have micro environments to ourselves, but not in the sense that digital environment affords. So automation has very interesting effects on the human psychology. Things like compliance and over-reliance on automation has been shown in the early aviation research, for example, that can be a cause for failures and airplane crashes, right? So how about cognition in the digital environment? One of the most important phenomena and trends that I observe in this trend is the general thing called cognitive offloading. What do I mean by this? Is that constantly we are offloading our minds into our devices. We don't remember telephone numbers anymore. We don't remember facts. We Google them. So it's the tool that calculates for us, memorizes for us, thinks for us, right? So that has very powerful implication for our mind. Then the way we read and the way we comprehend, for example, it has been shown that digital text stimulates the so-called shallow reading, skimming and flipping and jumping from place to place. Also contains things called hyperlinks, right, that can interrupt the flow of reading, etc., which also will have effects on the way we read things. Then all of this multitasking puts very, very important challenges to our attention. So it is this informational overload also increases distraction and so on. And a lot of students, and including me, sometimes we have illusions of knowledge just because we can Google things, right? And then we think we understand. Those are some of the implications I can briefly think of this digital environment on the humans. As the very famous and Nobel laureate Herbert Simon said, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention, talking in the context of nowadays that we are having economies of attention rather than economies of goods and, in a classical sense, money, for example, right? So it is the attention that companies want nowadays, our cognitive value, not our physical, for example, resources. So how about the perception, to go one level down? Watching the 3 minutes? Okay. Watching the computer screen, it puts a very interesting challenge. Most of the forms in the digital world are very regular in their shape, right? Very kind of, we see the world through pixels, which themselves are sort of kind of like little squares of light, right? Which define forms on a computer screen. And probably you're much more likely to see horizontal and vertical lines in the computer world, in the digital environment, rather than, so in the physical sense, this is known as oblique effect, in which we are much more sensitive and visually acute on vertical lines and horizontals compared to slanted lines, right? Because most of the things that even in the physical environment we'll see, most of the lines are vertical and many of them are horizontal. But I would expect this effect to replicate even further within the context of digital environment. Think about games like Minecraft, for example, right? How they look like all those squared and minimalistic shapes. This will have an effect on our brains. There is a phenomena that digital technologies already are changing our brains that are neuroplastic in many different forms. It redefines the way we see ourselves in the forms of digitalized self, social perception, right? Hyper-social perception will change the way we interact with people, etc. So what are the conclusions based on the concept of digital environment? First of all, it has very powerful transformative impact. This means that we have to redefine notions that we traditionally assume and take for granted, like space and time and self, etc. So then it will put great and strong adaptive pressures on us, right? Which will lead to very powerful cognitive and psychological and brain adaptational shifts and perceptual changes as well. So if I can try to predict and imply some of the changes and future trends under the digital technology, things, for example, maybe we will evolve a next level systems of communication. Language, symbolic language, will simply become insufficient, old-fashioned, and unimportant. As Elon Musk says, think about having a neural link that communicates with much larger bandwidth to another Neuralink chip in others' brain, which is not compressed by the sounds or the language that kind of compresses the thought, right? And then it's transmitted through the air. But think about it. Maybe we'll evolve completely different communication system because language itself evolved to solve particular communication problem within the context of physical and social environment. But having a completely new environment will change also the architecture and method of communication. There may be new forms of object perception. What does it mean to be a digital object, right? When actually it's created out of electricity. It's not created out of physical properties like we typically interact with. Will redefine the notions of space and time, just like a theory of relativity by Einstein redefined this notion in the physical sense. I would think that digital technology will redefine the notion of space and time like maybe non-existence in the essence, right? Then maybe we'll observe more and more decrease of empathy, paying the price of interacting with many, many people in daily world and daily interaction, which are cognitively, emotionally costly, since nowadays most of our stress comes from social interactions from people rather than from other types of things. Then future cognitive offloading, machines will remember for us, will calculate for us, will work for us. Then attention will be attuned to multitasking, will be much better at switching tasks probably and remembering where to find information rather than to what information to remember, that kind of stuff. We could alter our sensory systems. Imagine in some futuristic future in which you get direct stimulation to your brain. What is the, kind of the purpose of eyes, for example, that kind of setting? Just like the bats in the caves lost their vision because they live in a dark environment, they develop some other types of sensory communication systems, right? Maybe something will, in far future, will also affect us. It will change the nature of self nowadays. How do you define what is your identity, how you present, how people see you due to this social nature. And maybe we are at the dawn of the new digital species, machines embodied with artificial intelligence that will potentially have their own consciousness and become just a new species in the history of this earth. So thank you for your attention. This is just one psycho-philosophical exercise in trying to predict the properties of the digital environment and our digital future. So thank you for your attention. No questions? Any questions or something? Thanks. Okay, we can do that way. So thanks again.